The first machine at Skynet's disposal was not the walking T-series model, but something more simple, yet just as lethal in the right circumstances. The originator of the hunter-killer models, the T-1 ground assault vehicle, and it plagued humanity from the start of the future war right up until the very end. The inception of the T-1 didn't come from a desire to make a tracked killing machine, but out of a failure to make bipedal walking machines. A Cyberdyne Systems research division could not get the machines to balance and effectively make use of its legs, and with investors in the military breathing down their necks for the promised autonomous battlefield machine that would replace the ground troops, well, they had to come up with something, so the T-1 design began. Simplicity was the priority, with the project needing to be completed as soon as possible, so they could show it off to prospective buyers, but at the same time it needed to be impressive enough to be lethal and practical. As always, pressure is a great motivator, and the engineers and scientists of Cyberdyne looked at what worked on the battlefield for inspiration. They decided that instead of awkward legs they would go for tracks. Tried and tested throughout hundreds of conflicts, tracks were the perfect option that would allow this new machine the ability to handle almost any terrain. Also, a very stable base to stop it tipping over due to its odd weight distribution with its massive arms. The tracks are also able to handle small obstacles and barricades, and you could even knock out the way objects such as like a dumpster or a small vehicle if they were blocking your path. The rushed nature of the design could be seen with the tracks having exposed hydraulics and motors, which if shot at with small caliber weapons such as 5.56 or 7.62 would quite easily damage or even destroy these key components, and obviously heavy weapons would absolutely annihilate the tracks. Then it would strand and immobilise the T1, and if it can't move it's going to be far more vulnerable to all types of incoming attacks. But even if it was immobilised, it's a lethal machine thanks to the firepower it brings to the battlefield. The T1 is armed with two M134 miniguns. These are nasty weapons capable of firing between 2,000 and 6,000 rounds per minute, obviously per minigun. So the T1 can fire a potential of between 4,000 and 12,000 rounds per minute. Just imagine unleashing that much firepower on the battlefield. Infantry and light vehicles would be shredded, and it gave the capability of hails of suppressing fire, pinning troops to the ground and making them flee behind cover. It's actually not just so much the lethal capability of the T1 that impresses me, it's the ability as a support machine, spraying huge amounts of fire in every direction whilst other units move in for the kill. These miniguns could be used for light anti-aircraft fire to engage low-flying helicopters and to deter aircraft from doing close-range ground support. With their huge rate of fire, they could also be used to try to intercept lighter munitions such as anti-tank guided missiles or rocket-based weapons. When it comes to ammunition, the T1 would be able to use any 7.62 types of ammunition, such as armor-piercing, incendiary, and even hollow points if you're feeling extra mean that day. And the ammunition feeds to the miniguns go into the T1's wing-style arms, but it's not entirely clear where they lead. If it's somehow into the main body, then there's ample space for thousands of rounds, which would be required for the T1 to keep fighting for any consistent amount of time. But once we enter the future war, Skynet tended to use these as defensive units, either patrolling installations or as more as static turret, where burning through thousands of rounds of ammunition wouldn't be an issue as long as they kill the threat. We see this in Terminator Salvation, where a T1 variant pops up from the water in a defensive ambush to kill the intruding resistance forces, but it's stopped by a good amount of small arms fire. This leads me on to the shape and durability. It's a bit different to most Terminators. First, the shape is like a mini HK tank. It stands around 8 foot tall, being pretty big compared to most infantry, so it's an easy target, with widespread arms that are pretty thin in parts but durable thanks to its reinforced steel construction. Then the body and head sit on a 360-degree rotating platform fixed to the tracks. This allows it to spin to face any direction, which helps bring its massive firepower to bear. But a huge amount of the internal structure is exposed with very little armour covering some areas, making it extremely vulnerable to all types of weapons. And the actual armour is built for stopping small arms. Anything 50 caliber and above is going to cause serious damage to the T1, and anti-tank weapons would turn this into scrap in a single hit. The exposed components also make the T1 vulnerable to things like incendiary weapons and improvised ones like Molotov cocktails, with a hit from one being able to spread over the machine and could quite quickly cause damage to wires and weaker material components. And it seems that the design team hoped the overwhelming firepower would eliminate any resistance before they could effectively return fire. The sensor package for the T1 is primitive compared to later HK models. Being that this machine was built by humans and the first of the entire HK line, it makes sense that its sensors are basic, with its laser beam targeting system mounted inside a head unit. The Series 1 can identify and eliminate multiple targets using auditory, heat and motion sensors. However, this sensor suite comes with notable limitations. If a human remains completely still and silent and obscures their heat signature by positioning themselves near a warm object like a small fire, they can effectively evade detection. So there are massive gaps that can be exploited by anyone who has any knowledge about the T-1, which as the future war progressed would be widespread with resistance forces and pretty much any human that engaged in combat with Terminators. The head unit also seems to lack any reinforcement around the optical sensors, and even if it's made of ballistic glass, it's relatively thin and can easily be cracked to obscure vision or totally destroy this, and that would knock the sensor out. And if blinded, the T1 would be limited to firing basically whatever it could audio track and shooting at anything with a sound that seems to indicate a threat. So I'd expect a wild spray and pray shooting, but with a nice machine twist to it. There's no info on how it's powered, but battery seems the most likely way, with a few kind of car-sized vehicle batteries being suitable to keep the T1 moving for hours or even days depending on the quality and how efficient the motors are. Now the power when combined with the tracks would give it pretty good speed. I'd say about 30 miles an hour seems pretty viable. It could be even higher depending on, design, track quality, all that, and obviously what terrain it's on. It does mean you have a very mobile gun platform that can shoot and scoot. And if combined with other Terminators or Hunter-Killers, the T1 would make a fantastic battlefield support unit. So once Judgment Day had happened and the future war began, the T1 was a major asset for Skynet. It already had multiple of these machines ready to send out and start fighting. The factories to produce them were in the same complex as Skynet was based, and it didn't require too many resources or any kind of advanced tech to produce more, so obviously an instant kind of a battlefield ready unit that you could produce en masse. And as the war progressed, the T1 became a staple for the machines in the backline patrols and defensive duties. And even if the resistance destroyed the T1, it was easy to replace. A perfect machine for the attrition phase of the future war. There are several variations of the T1, with them being the following. The T-15 and T-17 Warrior robots, I believe these are from the Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines, developed by Cyberdyne Systems, and are advanced variants of the original T-1 battlefield robot. These variants feature a heavy, imposing frame, and are equipped with 50 caliber depleted uranium Gatling guns capable of firing up to 3,000 rounds per minute per gun. These basically seem like more armoured and upgunned versions of the base model. In the Salvation timeline, the T1 Terminator is different from the original prototype with a more streamlined and simplified torso design. The head unit has been lowered and reinforced with additional armour to reduce sensor vulnerabilities. All sensor inputs have been consolidated into two eyes positioned on either side of the head, enhancing durability and efficiency. Now, it is a bit odd that they say they're more armoured though, because in Salvation, when one pops up behind them from the water, it's killed by about 4 or 5 guys with small arms fire, so it still seems pretty light to me. But I do like the Salvation T1 because it is quite cool and looks kind of rusty and minging, so I do like that. But all in all, the T1 was a perfect start for Skynet forces, being simple and effective at its roles, eventually being outclassed by bigger Terminators and obviously stronger HKs. It was always a threat though if used correctly, as the miniguns and the mobile chassis are always a win in my book. And for defensive use, the T1 was perfect, basically as a smart turret, and if you gave it a little upgrade in the sensor package, it would be a pain to deal with, and potentially, with different weapons, it could deal with any target. So Skynet could have used the T1 as basically a switchable turret-like head, kind of something like out of Command & Conquer Tiberian Wars, if you remember that game, or it'd be Tiberian Sun, shall I say, where you had the GDI would put the base down and then switch the turrets on top. I think you could have the machine gun or the rockets. Same thing for the T1. Anyway, been fun to cover the T1, one of the originals. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, guys, and as always, have a beautiful evening.